emotional maturity, just think about it in terms of child development. We start out immature, of course, and hopefully we develop to a point where we're mature. Emotional immaturity is a sort of like a line of development. We can have our emotional development, but we can also have our intellectual development, our social development, our skills development, and all these threads, they're not independent of each other, but they really are distinct in terms of what is being matured or developed. So one of the things that is important to pay attention to here is that you can have a person whose social development or their skill development or their intellectual development has proceeded just fine. They can be highly intelligent, they're very popular people, they can be very effective in their jobs, very, very skilled. But in their intimate relationships and in their ability to modulate and regulate their own inner balance, think about it in terms of tolerance for stress, or think about it in terms of their ability to not get super emotionally reactive to events. In those areas, relationships and emotional management, they will show the immaturities. So a lot of times people will say, well, my parent, my boss, my whoever, they can't be emotionally immature because they're so successful, or my dad's a professor, or my mother is the most popular mom on the block. As if that means that they're mature emotionally, but it doesn't. You can have all kinds of skills and good development in other areas and still show emotional immaturity in those particular areas. So we want to understand too that there is a kind of a continuum of emotional immaturity to emotional maturity. And this is a moving target. It's not all the way from one extreme to the other, but we tend to settle into a range of emotional maturity as we grow up. It's kind of where we got to in our development. So you can have a person who maybe their development was unimpeded. They had adequate resources. They weren't mistreated or abused, and they grew up to be pretty emotionally mature, capable of good relationships, capable of handling stress, that kind of thing. So you can have a person who is toward the mature end of things, and then you can have another person who maybe didn't get so far because of trauma, because of neglect, or because of lack of opportunities, whatever it was that would have a kind of a limiting effect on their development. Those people may show more signs of emotional immaturity. Now, I do want to mention that I've got so much to say about this, but I did want to mention, because I think this is important, is that we have all noticed, if you're at all self-aware, that if you are sick, exhausted, stressed, your emotional maturity, even if basically your range is, pretty highly emotionally mature, you can regress back to more emotionally immature behaviors and attitudes and reactions, because we all have that inner child inside ourselves, like the Russian nesting dolls, that holds the capacity to be that little child again. So we can move according to how things are going in our lives. We might slide back down that developmental range to show more emotionally immature behavior, which of course is very embarrassing after it's over, but hey, it happens. Or you can be an emotionally immature person who has their fine moments, who rises above their defensiveness and their reactivity, who has a moment of insight, compassion, all these positive qualities, because they, for the moment, have sort of transcended their own fears. Or maybe they're particularly resourced, meaning things are going their way. They've got a new boyfriend, they got a new job, they got a raise, and it buoys them up, and then they can be more big-hearted and understanding toward other people. And temporarily, their functioning will improve to the point of showing more emotional maturity. This is a word to the wise for anyone who dates someone who's, like in a successful part of their lives, because that person can stretch into appearing more emotionally mature than they're really going to be when the stress hits or when the frustrations mount up. It's one of the best recommendations I know of why we should date people for a long time. To let them go back into their comfortable range.
Yes.
You can see
share some stress. When you say that they don't have the full capacity, can we go into a little bit more detail? What does that look like? How would that translate in a relationship? I want to give some concrete examples.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's think about it in terms of some of like the basic characteristics of emotional immaturity, and then we'll kind of see how they play out in those specific examples that you're talking about. So, I mean, number one, the biggest one, and of course everybody knows this if they've been involved with someone like this, is egocentrism. Emotionally immature people, just like 4-year-olds, I mean, who can blame a human being for wanting to be number one and be the center of attention? That's the way we are. And we all have that little, that baby nesting doll inside us that, is the perennial child. But hopefully we proceed to mature into these different selves as we get older, so that can be managed and contained, and we can live happily with other people and have good relationships. For the emotionally immature person, that egocentrism means all roads lead to them. They are their own primary concern. How things affect them is what they're interested in. They can't help but think about how something is going to affect them first. Now, we all do that. I mean, my goodness, we're all self-interested. Theirs is at the expense of empathy, often, for other people. Human beings are basically kind of self-centered down there in their core inner child self. But if you have developed empathy for other people, if you have an imaginative capacity to see how other people might be feeling about something and take that into account, that is a developed skill. And once you have empathy, you're able to have good relationships because it becomes automatic. You just don't do things without thinking about how it's going to affect the other person. It becomes part and parcel of your coping with the world. But with emotionally immature people, just like with 3 and 4-year-olds, it's me, 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 me. And they don't have that capacity to conceptualize that other people have this inner subjective experience, this inner world that's different from them and must be taken into account. They just don't see that.
Okay.
So an example would be a woman goes to her parent with a relationship problem. Maybe she's even considering divorce or whatever. And before she's said, 5 or 6 sentences, the mother's jumping in with, yeah, that reminds me about what happened with Dad. Or you're at a cocktail party or a party and someone asks you, what you do or what you're interested in, whatever, and you start to tell them, and before you can finish your thought, they're having an association to what you said that pertains to them. They're not having the experience of what is it like to be in a conversation with me. They just had a thought. So they're just, quote unquote, being themselves. They're just saying what they think. But those two things, the egocentrism and the poor empathy, are ruinous to a long-term, emotionally intimate relationship, because it just isn't sustainable if you don't think about the other person once in a while. They also tend to be very unreflective. They're not reflecting on their behavior. They're not self-reflective. If there's a problem in a relationship, For instance, let's say maybe there's a sister, an adult sister and an adult brother. Maybe the brother does or says something the sister doesn't like, the sister doesn't speak to him. If the brother is emotionally immature, he's never going to say to himself, gee, I wonder if there's something that I did that could have caused this estrangement. I wonder if I need to go back and really think about what I said. No, that's not happening, because emotionally immature people, like very small children, are always externalizing blame. If there's fault to be found, it's outside of them. So that also doesn't allow for repair in relationships. There's no amends being made. There's no apology being made. And so when things go wrong, as they inevitably do, because we're human beings, there isn't a mechanism in place whereby they can reflect on their behavior and go back to the person and work it out in some way through apology or amends. Also, one of the things that I want to kind of stress with this is that the emotionally immature person's view of reality is very self-absorbed. They have a kind of a optional relationship to reality. If they don't like the reality, it didn't really happen. They deny, they distort, they dismiss reality. So let's say that that daughter in the initial example that I gave, she goes back to her mom and she says, Mom, I was trying to tell you about my relationship with Bob, and you jumped in and started talking about Dad again. And you always do that. And I feel like I can't come to you with my problems because it always turns out to be about you. And the mother says, I didn't do that. I love you. Of course I want to know what's happening with you. Okay, that's crazy making. But from the mother's point of view, that very primitive self-defense of denial says, if it scares me, if it makes me feel bad about myself, it just didn't happen. Because emotionally immature people are guided by their emotions and their reactions in the moment. It's really pretty no holds barred. If something makes me feel bad, I didn't do it. It didn't happen. You're crazy. You're mistaken. And the way that they allow their feelings to determine the reality of a situation, like the mother might come back to that daughter and say, so you're just saying I'm the worst mother ever. I guess you don't love me anymore. Not at all what the daughter was saying. The daughter was trying to work out an interpersonal problem with the mother by being honest with her and emotionally intimate about the experience she had of being shut down. The mother comes back with what it feels like to her. I felt unloved when you criticized me, so you must not love me. And so they create their own reality, which is very hard on people who are trying to really communicate with them.